There is a marble relief. It sits behind museum glass in Rome, chipped at the edges, bleached by 2,000 years of Italian air. Most tourists pass it in under 10 seconds. They are looking for something grander, something with a name placard. But if you stop long enough to study the carved figures, a woman, wrists bound, head forced down by a soldier's grip, surrounded by men in polished armor who are not even looking at her, you begin to understand that what you are holding your breath in front of is not art. It is a policy document carved in stone. Rome did not create this to celebrate a battle. They created it to make sure everyone understood what victory looked like from the inside, from the prisoner's side. That woman's name is not written anywhere on the relief. Rome did not think names mattered once the chains went on. This matters because every week, tens of thousands of people search for this hidden side of Roman history, the part that never appears in school textbooks or documentaries. Drop a comment right now with your city and country. The people watching are not the kind who stop at the textbook version. Here is the contradiction that Roman history almost never admits out loud. Rome was simultaneously the most legally sophisticated civilization of the ancient world and one of the most methodically cruel. The same empire that produced Cicero and Marcus Aurelius also produced a bureaucratic machine for breaking human beings so finely tuned that modern historians still struggle to describe it without flinching. The jurists wrote the codes. The generals followed them precisely. What happened to conquered queens was not disorder, it was procedure. It was planned weeks in advance, approved by the Senate, and delivered with the cold precision of a public execution timetable. That is the part mainstream history rushes past, the clinical part. Because Rome was not simply violent, Rome was organized about it, and the commanders who designed these systems were not impulsive men. They were psychologists in armor studying exactly how to dismantle a human being's sense of who they were. The targets they chose were never random. The women they hunted most deliberately were the ones who had dared to operate as equals, not as wives, not as symbolic consorts, as rulers, as strategists, as threats who had looked Rome in the face and refused to blink first. Zenobia of Palmyra was the most dangerous version of that threat in the 3rd century. She governed a city-state sitting at the exact center of ancient trade between the Roman world and the East, a position that gave Palmyra an influence Rome had never formally authorized. After the chaos of the 260s, when Roman emperors were rising and falling within months, assassinated before they could organize a single campaign, she moved with extraordinary speed. She absorbed Egypt. She pushed north into Asia Minor. She issued orders in Roman-claimed provinces as though the empire had simply ceased to function. And then she minted coins, not her son's face, her own. That last act was not incidental. It was calculated provocation. A woman's image on currency in territories Rome considered its own was not simply a declaration of independence. It was a direct, psychological assault on the imperial self-image. It told Roman commanders, "Your authority here is fiction. Mine is real. I have replaced your face with mine on the money people exchange every day." And Roman commanders, men who had dedicated their entire lives to the expansion and enforcement of exactly that authority, read that message with something that went far beyond political irritation. It was personal. It demanded an answer proportionate to the insult. Emperor Aurelian was already reconquering a fractured empire piece by piece when he turned east toward Palmyra in 272 CE. His military objective was clear: destroy her army, retake the provinces. But the decision he made about Zenobia herself from the first day of planning reveals the specific darkness of how Roman commanders thought at the highest level. He needed her alive, not out of mercy, not out of respect. Because a body in the ground sends one message. A living captive sends that message every single day for years. His officers understood the brief without it being spoken plainly. Capture her breathing. Do not let her become a martyr before Rome finishes using her. She nearly escaped. Near the Euphrates, as Aurelian's forces closed in, Zenobia mounted a horse and rode hard toward Persian territory. An alliance there might have saved her. Roman cavalry caught her before she crossed. What no account disputes is the administrative reality of that instant. The moment Roman soldiers put hands on her, the law reordered itself. She became property, not metaphorically. Under the ius gentium, the law of nations as Rome interpreted it, a foreign ruler captured in armed conflict became a state asset. Her body, her future, her story. All of it transferred in a single procedural moment. Aurelian then did something that reveals exactly how calculated his thinking was. He waited 2 years before holding the triumph. 2 years, not 2 weeks. 2 years of Zenobia alive in Roman custody, while every ally she had cultivated watched from a distance and understood that Rome had absorbed her completely. Every month that passed without her death was a message to Eastern kingdoms and Persian courts and provincial governors who had briefly considered backing her. The message was simple. She is not even worth a quick execution. She is too useful as a permanent reminder of what defiance produces. No legend could form around her because she kept appearing in dispatches. Alive, irrelevant, controlled. When Aurelian finally announced the triumph for 274 CE, he made the costuming decisions himself. This was unusual. Triumphal ceremonies had designated officials who handled logistics. Aurelian overrode them on the question of what Zenobia would wear, because he understood, with the precision of a trained strategist, that the visual language of her chains would carry more weight than any speech he could commission. Not prison clothes. Not rags. Gold. Heavy bands of hammered gold locked around her wrists, her neck, her ankles. Not ceremonial chains, thick ones, weighted ones. Ancient sources record that attendants had to walk directly beside her to support some of the load. Because the chains were so heavy, she would have collapsed before reaching the Capitoline. The crowd was not supposed to see her fall. They were supposed to see her struggle to keep walking. Read that decision carefully. Aurelian chose gold because gold was the material that represented everything she had once controlled. Palmyra's wealth, the eastern trade routes, the Egyptian grain supply, the treasuries she had commanded. He took all of that abstract economic power and had it forged into shackles that pressed into her skin with every step. The chains were not restraints. They were a statement. Everything you commanded has been melted into the thing holding you here. The route through the city was miles long and deliberately winding, moving through the most densely populated districts, so every Roman citizen could press against the crowds and see her. She walked for hours, past temples and markets and public fountains, past senators on decorated platforms, past children who would grow up telling their grandchildren they had stood in the streets of Rome and watched the Queen of the East struggle to stay upright under her own chains. She knew what waited at the end of the route. Any educated ruler of the ancient world knew the pattern. Walk the procession, entertain the city, end at the Capitoline. And below the Capitoline, carved into the rock, sat the Tullianum, the underground execution chamber, where Vercingetorix had been strangled in the dark, while Caesar's triumph roared above. Where Jugurtha had clawed at stone walls in total blackness, until thirst finished what Rome had started. The Tullianum was not a secret. It was a structural feature of how Rome ended its most important triumphs. The crowd above celebrated. The prisoners disappeared below. Every step Zenobia took toward that hill was a step toward a question only Aurelian could answer. He had already answered it. She did not know which direction it had gone. He let her live. Not out of admiration, though later Roman writers tried to frame the decision that way to make him seem magnanimous. He kept her alive because a dead Zenobia served Rome once, on the day of her execution. A living one could serve indefinitely. He gave her a villa near Tivoli with gardens, servants, and walls she could not cross without permission. Some sources claim she eventually married a Roman senator. Others say her daughters were absorbed into respectable Roman households through arranged marriages. The details remain contested. The structure does not. She spent the rest of her life as a controlled exhibit, a breathing trophy at Roman dinner parties, living proof that Aurelian had won so completely he could afford to be generous. The generosity was the humiliation. Her survival was his property. If you are the kind of person who wants to understand how power actually works, not how it is presented, then you already know what I mean when I say Rome never simply built an army. Rome built a psychology. And this channel exists for the people willing to look at that psychology without the filter. Now, shift to Britain, 60 CE, and understand immediately why this next case cuts even deeper. Boudica had not attacked Rome. She had submitted to it. Her husband, Prasutagus, king of the Iceni tribe, had spent his reign playing by Roman rules. He accepted their governance, paid their taxes, and constructed a will that split his kingdom between Nero and his two daughters, betting that Rome would honor the arrangement and let his family retain something. He did everything the system asked of him. When Prasutagus died, the financial administrator Caius Decianus looked at that will and moved past it without ceremony. Rome's apparatus moved through Iceni territory and collected everything. Property stripped from the nobility. Loans that Roman lenders had extended were suddenly called in by force, allies treated as conquered subjects. Prasutagus had followed the rules precisely, and the rules simply stopped applying the moment Rome no longer needed his cooperation. When Boudica protested, the response was architectural in its cruelty, not a private rebuke, not a legal process. Roman officers had her flogged in public, in front of her own tribe, not as a criminal under charges, as a demonstration. The whip was not punishment for a specific crime. It was a communication to every Iceni watching. Your queen exists at our discretion. Her body is not protected by any law we are required to follow. Then her daughters. Tacitus writes it in short sentences and moves forward quickly, as if he himself cannot hold the words long. The girls were assaulted, not hidden, not quietly, in a way that ensured witnesses. The calculation behind that decision was cold and specific. Commanders knew that the violation of royal daughters in front of their people was not simply an act of violence. It was the demolition of everything that gave the tribe a sense of order. You are destroying not just the women, but the tribe's belief that anything they hold sacred can be protected. They intended it to produce paralysis, submission through shock. They miscalculated. Boudica moved through the British tribes with whip marks still healing on her back. She did not need rhetorical skill. She had evidence every person she spoke to could see. Tens of thousands joined her. When her forces reached Camulodunum, the Roman colonial city built on stolen Iceni land, no negotiation occurred. The temple of the deified Claudius, a stone monument to Roman authority that local people had been taxed to build, was torn apart and burned. The settlers were killed. No quarter given. The calculus was precise. You showed us what mercy looks like. We are returning it exactly as you delivered it. Londinium followed. The Roman governor Suetonius Paulinus made the cold calculation to abandon the city rather than lose his army defending it. Everyone left behind when Boudica's forces arrived was killed. Archaeologists digging beneath London still find the red burn layer in the soil from that fire, a mark that has survived 2,000 years. It is the direct physical consequence of what Caius Decianus ordered done to a queen in front of her own people. The final battle ended badly for Boudica. Roman legions on ground of their choosing were killing machines of a different category. When the British line broke, the wagons her own people had positioned behind them to watch the victory became a trap that sealed any retreat. Tacitus describes a slaughter. Boudica took poison before Rome could take her. She understood the triumph. She understood the chains. She knew what Roman hands did to the women they captured. She chose the one decision that remained entirely her own. Her daughters vanish from the historical record after the initial assault. No rescue, no documented fate, just silence, which may be the darkest sentence in this entire account. Now look at what those two outcomes mean together. Zenobia endures the triumph and survives in controlled comfort, branded as Aurelian's living exhibit. Boudica burns 3 Roman cities and refuses capture, exiting on her own terms rather than Rome's. 2 queens, 2 different responses to the same system that had already classified both of them as objects the moment they lost. Neither outcome represents what those women deserved. Both outcomes were designed entirely around what Rome needed, and here is what tourist brochures and cable documentaries never examine. The marble relief at the beginning of this story was not made by accident. Somebody commissioned it. Somebody approved the design. Somebody signed off on the bound woman with the soldier's hand, forcing her head down, the armored men around her who cannot be bothered to look. That piece of stone required intention. Someone in Rome's administrative machinery decided that image deserved to be permanent. It survived. Everything else, the names of the women whose fates it documents, the specific officers who gave the orders, the legal paperwork that classified queens as inventory, most of that is gone. But the image of the policy remains, chipped and bleached behind museum glass, still showing exactly what Rome wanted the world to understand about those who stood against it. There is also a small, corroded iron lock mechanism in the Vatican Museum's collection, recovered from the area of the Capitoline Hill. It is unremarkable to look at. Nothing announces its history. Most visitors spend their time on the statues across the room. But that lock is the most honest artifact Rome left behind. Not the poetry, not the philosophy, not the aqueducts. The corroded iron object that held a door shut in the dark while someone on the other side of it stopped being a person under the law. Both artifacts are still there. The marble relief with its careful, official violence. The lock with its silence. Rome gave us both. Both tell the same story in different materials. The triumphal arches are genuinely beautiful in afternoon light. The Stoic philosophy is worth reading. The engineering is extraordinary and real. None of that requires you to look away from Zenobia's shoulders under engineered gold or Boudica's posture in the moment after the whip, already calculating what comes next. You can hold both, the marble and the lock, the philosophy and the pit, the genius and the mechanism built to erase people who were inconvenient to the narrative Rome was writing about itself. That is what Rome actually was. Not a postcard, not a monument you photograph at golden hour. A system that could reclassify a queen as property in a single administrative instant, dress that property in the gold of her own stolen empire, and march her through screaming streets until her knees trembled, and record it in official dispatches as a day of celebration. If you made it to the end of this video, you are the reason this channel exists. You did not stop at the glossy version. You stayed for the locked door, the corroded iron, and the full weight of what those gold chains actually meant. Hit subscribe right now and tap the like button, because the algorithm buries this kind of history, and only you can keep it visible. Send this to someone who still thinks Roman glory was only aqueducts, marble, and wisdom. Let them see what the marble was built to cover.